The rain fell in sheets, pounding on the wooden roof of the ark. Inside, Noah's wife, a woman of strong will and sharp words, paced the length of the ship. Her eyes darted to the window, now closed and silent, as if it could reveal the fate of her friends, her gossips left behind in the deluge. The sound of the storm grew louder, a constant reminder of God's wrath. Noah, her husband, sat hunched over, his face etched with worry and determination. He had built the ark as God commanded, but the strain of the task was evident in every line of his body. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words and unshared fears, but it wasn't always this way. In the Chester play, Noah's wife was not just a passive observer. She was a woman who refused to be silenced, a woman who fought for those she loved. Unlike the York wife, who remained at home in ignorance, the Chester wife was a full participant in the building of the ark. She worked alongside her husband and sons, her hands calloused from the labor. Yet, despite her efforts, a moment of rebellion would change everything. "I have my gossips every achone," she declared, her voice firm. "1 foot further I will not gone. They shall not drown by St. John, and I may save their lives. They loved me full well by Christ, but thou wilt let them into thy kist, else row forth no, when thy list and get thee a new wife." Her words were a challenge, a defiance of God's command and her husband's authority. She swore by Christ and St. John, figures who, in their own right, had faced the waters of salvation and martyrdom. Her use of their names was a bold move, a way to emphasize her resolve and to remind Noah of the power of loyalty and love. Noah's face darkened. "Our tarrying here me highly grieves. Over the land the water spreads. God do he as he will." The wife's refusal to board the ark without her gossips brought the story to a standstill. The audience, watching from the medieval street, felt the tension. They were shut out of the ark, left to ponder their own sins and the consequences of their actions. The drowning of the gossips was not just a punishment from God. It was a warning to the women of Chester, a reminder of the dangers of idle talk and the power of speech to bring about one's own downfall. The Chester wife's rebellion was not just a personal act. It was a moment of temporal collapse. She brought together the flood, the crucifixion, and the baptism of Christ, all in one defiant speech. Her words bridged the gap between the past and the present, challenging the linear narrative of the Genesis flood. She reminded the audience that the sins of the old world continued, that the waters of the flood could not wash away the human tendency towards transgression. Noah, in his frustration, shut the window, and for a moment silence reigned. The audience, now outside the ark, was left to reflect on their own lives and the choices they had made. They were part of the story, living proof that the sin of the old world persisted. The wife's silence after her failed attempt to save the gossips was a powerful statement. She had fought, but in the end, she was forced to accept God's will. Yet, her silence did not erase the impact of her actions. The memory of her rebellion lingered, a reminder that even in the face of divine authority, human will could still assert itself. The water rose, and the gossips vanished from the script, but the sin that drove them to their fate remained, a constant presence in the lives of the audience. The play ended, but the questions it raised about loyalty, authority, and the power of speech continued to echo in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Noah, still on edge, waited for his wife's next question, unsure of what the future held. The ark had landed, but the world was changed, and the Noah family, survivors of the old world, were left to navigate this new, uncertain landscape. The rain had stopped, but the storm of human sin and defiance continued. In the world of medieval drama, particularly in the plays about Noah and the flood, the roles of women and the concept of performance itself are complex and multifaceted. These plays, often performed during religious festivals like the Corpus Christi, were not just entertainment, but also a form of religious and moral instruction. They blended biblical stories with local traditions and humor, creating a unique blend of the sacred and the secular. One of the most intriguing characters in these plays is Noah's wife. She is often portrayed as a troublesome figure, challenging Noah's authority and causing delays in the building of the ark. For example, in the Chester Mystery Cycle, Noah's wife is depicted as reluctant to board the ark, even as the floodwaters rise. She argues with Noah, questioning his decisions and the divine command. This portrayal reflects a broader medieval fascination with the idea of women as subversive and disruptive, a theme that runs through many medieval texts, including Chaucer's The Wife of Bath's prologue. However, the role of Noah's wife is not just a simple representation of a nagging wife. Her character serves a deeper purpose. By highlighting the domestic conflicts and the tensions within the family, the play draws attention to the human side of the biblical story. It makes the divine narrative more relatable and accessible to the audience. Moreover, Noah's wife's trouble-making highlights the loss of life caused by the flood, and hints at the painful exclusions of wives from the inner lives of husbands, of persons from life itself, and from salvation. The medieval concept of performance is also crucial to understanding these plays. In the Middle Ages, the act of performing a play was seen as a form of ritual and devotion. The actors, often members of the local community, were not just playing roles, but were believed to be embodying the characters they portrayed. This idea is rooted in the concept of performativity, which suggests that words and actions can create reality. For instance, when Noah and his wife speak, they are not just reciting lines. They are bringing the biblical story to life, making it present and immediate for the audience. The flood plays also explore the theme of memory and forgetting. The flood itself is a cataclysmic event that wipes away the past, allowing for a new beginning. However, this new beginning is always built on the memory of what was lost. In medieval thought, this idea of remembering and forgetting was closely tied to the concept of time. The plays often depict a collapse of time, where past, present, and future are intertwined. For example, the rainbow, which appears after the flood, is a sign of God's covenant with humanity. It serves as a reminder of the flood and a promise of future protection, bridging different temporalities. The medieval understanding of time was also influenced by religious beliefs. The Eucharist, a central part of Christian liturgy, was seen as an intersection of history and eternity. In the Ludus Coventry Passion Play 1, this idea is dramatized, emphasizing the eternal nature of Christ's sacrifice. The medieval drama, therefore, was not just a linear retelling of a story, but a complex interplay of different times and realities. Moreover, the plays often incorporate elements of local folklore and superstition. For example, the Gossips, a group of women who appear in some versions of the flood play, are shown as drunken and disorderly. Their behavior is a form of social commentary, reflecting medieval attitudes towards women's speech and behavior. The term gossip in the Middle Ages referred not only to idle talk, but also to close friends and companions. The gossip's drunkenness also prefigures Noah's own drunkenness in the biblical story, adding a layer of foreshadowing and complexity to the play. In the Chester play, the gossip's role is further developed. They are shown as a disruptive force, mirroring the chaos of the flood. Their behavior is often used to illustrate the dangers of idle speech and the importance of order and discipline in society. This reflects broader medieval concerns about the control of speech, especially among women, who were often associated with gossip and idle talk. The character of Noah's wife and the theme of performance in medieval drama offer a rich and nuanced perspective on medieval society and its values. These plays are not just entertainments, but are deeply embedded in the cultural, religious, and social fabric of the time. They provide a window into the medieval mind, showing how people understood their world and their place in it. Through the lens of Noah's wife and the Gossips, we see the tensions and contradictions of medieval life, where the sacred and the profane, the past and the present, and the human and the divine are all intertwined. In the world of medieval plays, time doesn't always move in a straight line. Instead, it can twist, turn, and even repeat. This is especially true in the Towneley Second Shepherd's Play, a funny and somewhat bizarre nativity story from the 16th century. The play shows us that time can be experienced in many different ways, much like how queer theorists talk about time as something that isn't always linear or straightforward. The play starts on a cold, windy hillside where three shepherds complain about the weather, their bosses, and their wives. Just when you think the play will follow the usual nativity story, a mischievous character named Mac enters. Mac is a thief who loves to play tricks. He casts a spell to make the shepherds fall asleep and steals a sheep. When Mac gets home, his wife Gyll is not happy. She fears he'll be caught and hanged. But being clever, Gyll suggests a trick. They swaddle the sheep in a blanket and pretend it's their newborn baby. When the shepherds come looking for the missing sheep, Gyll acts like she's just given birth. The shepherds are fooled at first, but one of them notices the baby has a long snout. The shepherds punish Mac by tossing him in a blanket, and then they finally head to Bethlehem to find the real nativity scene. This playful episode with Mac and Gyll is more than just a funny diversion. It actually challenges the usual linear narrative of the nativity. In the Bible, the birth of Jesus is a moment of hope and the promise of a better future. But in the second shepherd's play, Gyll and Mac's trick with the sheep creates a different kind of birth that doesn't fit into the neat, procreative timeline. This is similar to what queer theorists call queer time, where the usual expectations of time and future are disrupted. Lee Edelman, a queer theorist, suggests that queer time resists what he calls reproductive futurism. This means that queer time challenges the idea that the future is always tied to having children and creating a straight, family-oriented timeline. In the play, Gyll's birth of a sheep that is eventually eaten doesn't lead to a future filled with hope and salvation. Instead, it's a moment of chaos and play that delays and complicates the story. This idea of queer time is also about how people experience time differently. In the play, the shepherds Mac and Gyll all have different perceptions of time. The shepherds are focused on their immediate problems, Mac is living in the moment with his tricks, and Gyll is thinking about the future consequences of their actions. This diversity of temporal experiences is something that medieval plays often explore, showing that time is not a single, shared experience. By examining the sheep episode in the second shepherd's play, we can see how medieval drama can teach us about different ways of experiencing time. The play's use of comedy and trickery shows that time can be fluid and unpredictable, much like the diverse experiences of time that queer theorists discuss. This helps us think about how time can be experienced in ways that don't always fit into the usual, linear narrative. In the second shepherd's play, the silly and playful moments are just as important as the more serious religious scenes, and they offer a different way of understanding the story of the Nativity. This chapter looks at the second shepherd's play from the Towneley manuscript, and how it plays with time in a way that's different from how we usually think about it. It talks about how the play uses ideas from queer theory to show that time isn't always a straight line, especially when it comes to stories about families and the future. This means that the play challenges the idea that having kids is the only way to look forward to the future. The chapter starts by noting that the earliest audiences of the second shepherd's play would have known the nativity story very well. They expected an angel to appear, and for the shepherds to visit the baby Jesus. However, the play introduces a sheep episode that doesn't fit neatly into this story. This interruption is both funny and strange, especially because it involves a lot of imagery about pregnancy and birth. But the funny part is that Mac and Gyll, who live in a house with no children, pretend that a sheep is a baby. This makes the audience rethink what a baby in a manger really means. The Towneley manuscript, which contains the second shepherd's play, has a complicated history. It was put together by a scribe who tried to make different plays look like they belong together as one big story. However, scholars like Alexandra Johnston argue that the second shepherd's play was originally a standalone Christmas play. The scribe's efforts to make the plays fit together in a linear way didn't always work, especially since the manuscript includes 2 shepherd's plays, but no play about the actual birth of Jesus. This means the manuscript encourages readers and viewers to see the nativity through the eyes of the shepherds, rather than focusing on the birth itself. The manuscript's history is also interesting because it might have been compiled during the reign of Queen Mary, a time when Catholicism was briefly restored in England. This means the manuscript could have been a way to bring back old traditions and create a sense of continuity with the past. Later, it became a cherished object for the Catholic Towneley family, who kept it as a memory of a time when these plays were still performed. This makes the manuscript a kind of time capsule, holding memories of the past and hopes for the future. The second shepherd's play itself is a great example of how medieval drama used anachronism to make the biblical past feel present to its audience. The play uses medieval names, fashions, and places, and the characters often talk about things that haven't happened yet in the story, like the crucifixion. This mix of different times can be confusing, but it also creates a sense of a shared now between the performers and the audience. For example, when the first shepherd complains about the cold, the audience might feel the same cold, whether they're outside on a chilly night or inside a cold building. This shared experience brings the biblical past, the medieval present, and the audiences present together in a kind of expanded now. The shepherd's speeches also expand the gospel story by adding social and political commentary. The first shepherd talks about the difficulties of being a poor farmer, and the second shepherd warns young men about the dangers of marriage. These speeches make the shepherds relatable to the audience, but they're also vague enough that the audience can apply them to their own lives. When Mac enters, disguised as a yeoman, he adds a new element to the story. His trick with the sheep in the cradle is a funny and disruptive moment that challenges the idea of a perfect, linear narrative. Overall, the second shepherd's play and the Towneley manuscript show how medieval drama and its later compilations played with time in ways that resist simple, linear understandings. They create a complex, layered experience that brings the past, present, and future together in a way that's both entertaining and thought-provoking. Mac's costume and fake southern accent are the first signs that things aren't what they seem in the play. When he pretends to be the king's yeoman, the shepherds quickly see through his act and mock him. This is important because, from the audience's perspective, there's no real difference between Mac's fake role and the shepherd's own performances. Until the shepherds call him out, the audience might think he's just another character in fancy clothes, like the ones they're used to seeing in these plays. But when Mac is revealed as a thief, it changes everything. Instead of the expected angel, the audience gets a thief, which sets the play on a different path filled with more deception. This twist in the story also changes the play's focus from the nativity narrative to something more complex. At first, it seems like Mac and his wife, Gyll, are all about having kids. Gyll is described as very fertile, and Mac talks a lot about children, even wishing he could escape their crying. But when the shepherds ask about his wife, Mac paints a picture of her as a gluttonous, lazy woman who's always pregnant. He says she eats too much, drinks too much, and gives birth every year. It's a grotesque image that contrasts sharply with the idea of the Virgin Mary, whose body is pure and untouched. Mac's complaints about Gyll's fertility are actually a way to question the idea that having lots of children is always a good thing. In medieval times, having many children was often seen as a blessing, but Mac sees it as a curse. He says Gyll's constant childbearing is making him poor, and he even suggests that if he had more money, she'd still eat him out of house and home. This idea of reproduction as a burden is unusual and challenges the usual narrative of family and fertility. When Gyll finally speaks, she presents a very different picture. She says she's been working hard, spinning thread to earn money for the family. This shows that Gyll is not the lazy, gluttonous woman Mac described. Instead, she's a hardworking housewife who is trying to support her family. Mac, on the other hand, is a thief who doesn't contribute to the household. His sheep stealing is a short-term solution that will only lead to more problems, while Gyll's spinning is a sustainable way to earn a living. The contrast between Mac and Gyll's approaches to work and family is significant. Gyll invests in the future through her labor, while Mac's actions only lead to more immediate problems. This highlights the idea that true productivity and stability come from hard work and responsibility, not from quick fixes and lies. Despite Mac's claims about Gyll's many children, the play never shows any of them. When the shepherds search Mac's house, they find no children, only an empty cradle. This absence is puzzling and makes the audience wonder if Mac's descriptions of Gyll's fertility were just more lies. The empty cradle, which Gyll uses to hide the stolen sheep, becomes a symbol of the play's themes of deception and the contrast between appearance and reality. In the end, the play uses Mac and Gyll's story to challenge traditional ideas about family, work, and responsibility. It shows that the appearance of fertility and productivity can be deceptive, and that true value comes from honest labor and integrity. The play's focus on these themes makes it more than just a comedy. It's a thoughtful exploration of the complexities of human nature and the dangers of living a life based on false pretenses.